about 30 seconds. And okay, it's about 10 seconds. Let's give it a few more seconds, and then let's begin. So let's take a breath. Like if I was teaching this right now, what I would tell my students is, okay, let's review. And next week is the final. And they would all stress and get all nervous. They're like, don't stress, there is no final. But I'll go back to review one particular question that we posed 6-7 lectures back when this whole series started, and let's try to bring it to an end. So let me share the screen with you right at the beginning. And you should see a very familiar picture that you've seen more than once. Here are 3 Torah giants. You might argue with me, they're not all Torah giants, but let's call them 3 amazing human beings, each one in their own way. And again, on purpose, there are no names, just the dates. They traversed the 1700s. We're in the 1800s. These were the 1700s. So in the century before Rav Hirsch, before Rav Hildesheimer, before Yaakov Ettlinger, Isaac Bernays, the giants in the Jewish world, across the Jewish world, were the Gaon of Vilna. There's his dates. The Baal Shem Tov, and again, we don't have an accurate picture of the Baal Shem Tov. This is the Baal Shem Tov of London, but everyone puts it up there as the Baal Shem Tov. And then, of course, Moses Mendelssohn. Moshe, the son of Mendel. And I posed a question, if you remember, within the first, I don't remember, first 10, 15 minutes of that first lecture of these series. Modern Orthodox Jews today, in America, let's say, before we continue with this in a different way, with God's help in some future lectures, but modern Orthodoxy in the United States, Yeshiva University, a flag institution that calls itself modern Orthodox. And again, I'll say it again, like I said it, I believe more than once, I am proud to say that I consider myself a modern Orthodox Jew. And maybe many of you on this Zoom world that we live in would identify similarly. Which of these 3 is the closest? And I know which one has mentored, of course, that's not possible, but which one is the typical modern Orthodox Jew? Is it the Gaon of Vilna, right here, whose motto, whose credo was, again, Torah learning, Torah learning, Torah learning. And clearly, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, Torah was explained to be the greatest mitzvah, the most important one. We're not going to disagree with the significance of Torah learning in the Jewish world. So is modern Orthodoxy within the realm of the Gaon of Vilna? Or no, is it the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the Hasidic movement, and where dveikut, the attachment to God, was utterly important, of being constantly in a happy mood and trying to serve Hashem, not so much through the actual learning, but the emphasis was put on prayer, on talking to God, on getting to know God in every way possible. Or is it Moses Mendelssohn, who engaged German society, who learned the vernacular quite well, who went out there, and not for a second did he veer off the path of Torah and mitzvot. What his descendants might end up, or what they ended up doing, or where they went, that's a different story. He himself was a devout Jew his entire life. And therefore, the modern Orthodox Jew of today, while we look back to all 3 as great luminaries in our annals of amazing people, who are we closest to? And I asked you to think about it. And I'm not pushing you in any way. What I would do if I would actually give a final, my last question would be a reflective question, where I would want you to think, what do you think, based on everything we've seen, where is the modern Orthodox Jew? Now, I did not put up here the pictures of Rav Hirsch and the people of Germany. And you'll see why, because that's a whole different understanding of modern Orthodoxy. And again, the Gaon of Vilna was pulled up as a role model for the Maskilim. The Maskilim looked at the Gaon of Vilna and said, yeah, we identify with him. He definitely engaged secular studies, granted secular studies in service of understanding Torah, but he was not afraid of science. He was a maskil like we are, said the Maskilim. So they looked to that person and saw someone that had their qualities. And like I mentioned in that first lecture, everyone went back and tried to find people in the distant past that were, oh, Maimonides was modern Orthodox. But here we are in 2021, and we are about to be done with the 1800s. And where does that leave us? So keep that in mind, and we'll come back and try to figure all that out. With Rav Hirsch, and let's end Rav Hirsch, and we did end it a little bit last week, but now let's put it together and move on. Towards the end of the year 1888, when Rav Hirsch was reaching his 80th year, he started to feel quiet, weak at times, but that didn't stop him. His last Yom Kippur, it is said of eyewitnesses who recorded it, that as weak as he was, he fasted against the advice of everybody, and actually against the advice of his own children, Davin Ne'ilah himself, went on for an hour saying every word and singing every tune, having fasted and quite in a weak state, but no one realized he was so himself. Again, Rav Hirsch is one of the few people where you can actually document that this man did not waste a second in his life, literally. And that was his, he lived his life literally with a fulfillment of every second. If he wasn't writing an article, he was dealing with an issue in school. If it wasn't that, he was dealing with someone's other problem, and commenting and writing another book, etc. And the last month, it was December 28th of 1888, is when he had passed away. The Jews of Germany, especially the Jews of Frankfurt, were in deep mourning. As you have seen when we read this child who was so young at the time, remembered the funeral, Hermann Schwab of Rav Hirsch. Everyone in Germany had come to this funeral. It was one of the largest funerals in Frankfurt ever. The newspapers of the time gave the account of over 12,000 people had attended this funeral. The officials of Frankfurt had to remove the actual gates of the cemetery because of damage that might happen with the throngs of people coming to the funeral of Rav Hirsch. All the great Chachamim, Gedolim, Rabbanim of Germany had come to his funeral. Even rabbis who had issues with him, those issues were small in comparison to hey, Rav Hirsch was Rav Hirsch at the end. This man deserves the credit and he did so much, and whatever I disagreed with him, it didn't matter. Speaker after speaker spoke, family members spoke at the funeral. It was a long funeral. It's a winter day, it was cold, the day short, and it lasted literally almost till dark. The students of the school came out marching, of course, with the Torah and Derech Eretz banner, but different students, each one holding up I don't remember the number, I would guess 16, 17, 18 books. The books that he had written and were already published in his lifetime were marched along with the actual coffin. He was buried with a Sefer Torah as a very symbolic gesture. And one aspect after another. The last person that spoke was Rabbi Hildesheimer. Rabbi Azriel Hildesheimer, who was almost Rav Hirsch, except on that one issue of participation in Wissenschaft das Judentum, engaging that science of Judaism, which Rabbi Hirsch or Rav Hirsch was totally opposed to, and I'll come back to that again. But it didn't matter. That was not an issue to make anything about. Okay, that's how he feels. We go on, we respect each other. We're working for the same cause. The beauty of great Chachamim is that even when they have a disagreement about a particular issue, they still remain friends and respect each other's opinion, very much not like today. And he was broken, and he understood the community was broken. He tried to give them solace with his words. And the last pasuk that he quoted as he ended his eulogy for Rav Hirsch was the pasuk in Yirmiyahu. It comes from one of the Haftarot towards the end from the beginning of Shemot. I think it's Bo maybe, where Hashem says, "Va'ata al tira avdi Yaakov," and you, my servant Yaakov, Jewish people, do not be afraid. And then again in a parallelism, ve'al techat Israel, and don't be afraid, Israel, Jewish people. Because Hashem says, Ki hineni moshiacha merachok, I will come and help you from afar. Vetzaracha, and your children, your descendants, mi eretz shivyam, from the land of their captivity, and Yaakov will return, and they'll rest and they'll be quiet, and they won't be afraid. His point was that Rav Hirsch had left an amazing legacy, and don't be afraid. Your path is quite clear, because Rav Hirsch has really, and it was clear at the funeral, he had raised by now 2 generations of committed Jews who followed this ideology of Torah and Derech Eretz, engaging culture, the language, appreciating the spirituality of non-Jews. That was Rav Hirsch. And he passed away. The legacy of Rav Hirsch and how it spreads out immediately after his death, and even in his lifetime, was quite interesting. Jews across the world had heard of him. He himself, though, was not the rabbi who wrote to all the other rabbis. Rabbi Hildesheimer communicated with many. Questions came to him from many rabbis in halachic questions. And Rav Hildesheimer, and I believe I showed it to you last time, but I don't know if you can see the thickness of at least of one of the volumes, of his Shelot and Shuvot. And this is just one of many, many Sfarim Rav Azriel Hildesheimer of Berlin had written. Now he will pass away in 1899, about 10, 11 years after Rav Hirsch had passed away. But for the next 10 years, he remains in charge. But the legacy of Rav Hirsch, for example, and I actually own, it's a weird thing I own, it's my weird books. I don't really collect antiquities and manuscripts. That's not what I do. But I actually have a copy of a book published in Vilna in the early 1900s, not too long after Rav Hirsch had passed away, in Vilna, of all places, called Meitav Hegayon, Kolel Meitav Hegionei HaYahadut of Shimshon Raphael Hirsch from Frankfurt. And the translator from German into Hebrew says these are pearls, diamonds you've never seen, and just collects Rav Hirsch's commentaries from Torah and here and there. Suddenly for the people of Vilna to be able to bask in the Torah of Rav Hirsch. And again, like I said last time, much of his work gets translated immediately into other European languages. And the community is safe. It goes on. But I want to now, and I was grappling with this. There's two people I would love to discuss. And I'm not sure who to start with. I keep on playing in my head back and forth, which one I should do first. So you know what, let me do the younger one maybe. So let me just close what I had open there, get rid of it before it gets in my way, and open up this one. Okay, anybody out there who is willing to take a gamble to identify this very pensive looking man. And this is, there's, I don't know how many pictures of him exist, or almost all this one, except for one or two when he's not looking this way. But who is this man? Anybody?
Rav Soloveitchik?
Nope. There is a little bit of a resemblance, but no.
I'll guess David Tzvi Hoffman.
No. No, not at all. Okay, so then I'll I'm assuming so much, right? This is none other than, I'll give you his Hebrew name. His Hebrew name was Tzvi Hirsch. Does that help?
Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer?
No, not Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer.
Wasn't
Too young and too non-rabbinic to be Chayes.
No,
Chayes.
it's not Chayes, no. This is Tzvi Hirsch Gretz. This is none other than Heinrich, the very famous Heinrich Gretz. And is there anyone, let me just have a different view of who's here. Wave to me if your cameras are on, and if they're not, just call out. If any of you have ever received or actually have on your shelf right now the History of the Jews by Heinrich Gretz. It was a bar mitzvah gift or a bat mitzvah gift that everybody has received. The book was been published and translated across our Jewish world, not popular today at all. But in its height, Heinrich Gretz, The History of the Jews. Now, before we get to the history of the Jews and Heinrich Gretz, how does he fit into this? Heinrich Gretz, believe it or not, in totality, had a very, what to call it, sad, successful and yet not successful. Yes, successful with his book of history. That finally gave him grounding. But he didn't do very well. Many times, not because there were other forces. It's like mazel, as they say, hakol talui b'mazal afilu sefer Torah shebehechal. You know what? And like Chazal say, this and this, lav b'schute talia milta, ala b'mazel talia milta. It depends on your mazel sometimes. If you're in the right place at the right time, my mazel was good. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, not so good. And overall, Heinrich Gretz is not doing that. He was born in 1817. Okay. Again, Rav Hirsch was born in 1808, just to give you an idea. He was born in 1817. somewhere in a small town next to the town of Posen. And he gets a wonderful rabbinic education, studies well, loves learning. But as he comes into his teenage years and late teenage years and early 20s, he is torn apart by the following. On his own, he went and studied French, Latin, and basically self-educated himself in secular studies. And he became confused, being suddenly exposed to a whole new world. He wondered, and to use the famous line that Rav Soloveitchik, since someone's mentioned his name, Rav Soloveitchik always used, which was, we sometimes have a crisis in our existential being here. Life isn't easy. We wonder sometimes, why are we here? What's the purpose of this? How do I fit into the world? And that was the question that Heinrich Gratz had. And luckily for him, someone by the name of Rav Hirsch had written this little booklet called The 19 Letters of Ben Uziel. And Tzvi Hirsch Gratz, Heinrich, reads the book. Again, it's a tiny book, if you remember, these 19 letters, the exchange between Naphtali and Binyamin about the issues of the day, where Binyamin is totally confused, just like Gratz was. And he felt like the book spoke to him. And by the way, for the rest of his life, he gave credit to Rav Hirsch for it, but more than that. He was so impressed by it, of this crisis of faith, that he actually sends a letter to Rav Hirsch and asks Rav Hirsch, who at this point had not yet come to Frankfurt, who at this point was Rav or Ober-Rabbiner in the city of Oldenburg, which was the first position that Rav Hirsch held as a rabbinic personality, and wants to know, can he come and study with him? And Rav Hirsch, never to turn anyone who wants to come learn down, says to Gratz, Tzvi Hirsch, you want to come? You're more than welcome. And for the next 4 years, mark that, 4 years, Heinrich Gratz studies with, lives in the house of Rav Hirsch, knows Rav Hirsch very well. The fact that the two will go off and Rav Hirsch will not be very happy with him, I'll come to that, but the influence was for the rest of his life. In the first book that Gratz publishes, which was comparing Gnosticism to Judaism, the dedication page read, to Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch, the spirited champion of historic Judaism, the unforgettable teacher, the fatherly friend in love and in gratitude. He was, and he never ever spoke ill of Rav Hirsch, even though I'll show you in a second what happens. So Gratz doesn't know what he wants to do. After reading this book in Oldenburg, he wants to become a rabbi. He starts studying for the rabbinate and then decides, I'm not sure that I want to do this. I'd rather teach. So he looks for a teaching position, actually becomes principal of a school in Londonsburg, and the school stays open for a year and closes. Okay, the mazel isn't working. Looks for a different position in a different town, starts there too, something goes wrong there also. So he moves around from place to place. In the interim, he meets up with a fellow that we spoke of last time, Zachariah Frankel. Now, Zachariah Frankel, in his personal life again, was a traditional Jew, a religious Jew, kept Torah and mitzvot, and gets impressed by Frankel, and they stay friends. And it's Frankel who pushes him to get a little bit more interested into Jewish history. And Gretz does. And actually now travels to Breslau, where this other seminary is. And he looks for a position there. And they find some position for him. Now, something else happens in Germany at this time, which is extremely important, especially for the proud Jews who are now engaging German society, who are thinking, like Zunz did and Steinschneider, that there's a science to Judaism, the culture of the Jewish people for 2,000 years, their prayers, their poetry, the Midrashim, the Talmud is a huge heritage and legacy. The world should know about what we have done. We were not living in ghettos doing nothing. We were writing books. We wrote philosophy. We engaged the world in our world, and no one knows it. They think we're like people who just charge interest. We're the money makers. We're more sophisticated than that. Let's show the world. As these Jews who are now coming, like, take, for example, Mendelssohn did years earlier. And Germany was shocked. Their top philosopher, as they called him, the Jewish Plato, the Jewish Socrates, Mendelssohn. Jews are capable. Look what they've done with their past. At this point, a German person by the name of Leopold von Ranke. That's a good German name. Leopold von Ranke, you should know. If I would ever ask you, who is the father of history, you'll tell me Herodotus in Greece. Well, Herodotus' history is far from history. He wrote down whatever he heard, whatever he heard was true, he wrote it down. He found something written that was true, he copied it. And that's the father of history. The father of modern history, the person who turned history into a science, as accurate as history could be in science, the first historian to develop the concept of sources and checking out sources, of primary sources, secondary sources, independent sources that confirm each other, was Leopold von Ranke. Now, von Ranke wrote a huge collection of something called Das Geschichte von Deutschen Volk, the story of the Aryan nation, if you want, the German people, how great they are, how their history, their culture goes back, and it's the most ancient of civilizations, these Germanic tribes, long before anybody else. This is, mind you, the one who used critical thinking to come to this conclusion, but that's irrelevant right now. But he did establish that, and we give him credit. Jews in Germany felt a little bit slighted. They had no doubt that their history is older than German history. In fact, Jewish history in Germany was easily for close to 2,000 years when Gretz is there, if not even more. Jews were in Germany as early as the 9th century, for sure. Maybe not in large groups, but by the time you hit the 1000s, there's a significant Jewish population in Germany. So Jews have been there. And they felt slighted. And it's at this point that Gretz gets this idea. Now, there were other Jews, not important who, people like Jost, who had written Jewish history, but not great Jewish history. And Gretz took it upon himself to, in a way, answer Ranke and show him, no, that the Jews have a history that goes quite back, and we do have a culture, and we're quite ancient. And one thing about Gretz is that he felt a tremendous amount of Jewish pride his entire life and stood up for it. You can even call him a proto-Zionist before political Zionism of Herzl gets born very soon. And he visited Palestine in the 1870s. And he's out there. He cares about Judaism, is passionate. Now, what the right Judaism is, he's trying to figure it out. He's not really sure, but clearly studying the sources is something important. So he begins to sit down in the 1850s, and for about the next 25 years, he begins to write not das Geschichte from Deutschen Volk, but das Geschichte from the Juden in the Alte Zeitung in des Gewarte, Gewährung, which basically means Jews from antiquity until today. He plans it out volume by volume, and he begins to publish them. He did not publish them like from the beginning. He started with volume 4 first, which dealt with Bayit Sheni, but he knew exactly his plan and eventually gets to write the 12th volume, and they become famous. They were criticized a little bit by Jews. They were criticized a lot by non-Jews because Gretz had the nerve in his historical quest for truth to openly speak of anti-Semitism and attack in a mild way, but it wasn't mild when you attacked Christianity and maybe the roots of anti-Semitism coming from the Christian world. Now, Gretz had a number of flaws. He hated Hasidim. So when he gets to the part of the Hasidim, he says something like, and I'm paraphrasing it in a mild way, like somewhere there in the East, Poland, right, people who we hear are jumping up and down, and some kind of Judaism. He had no patience, understanding for the beauty of the Hasidic movement. Even for Polish Jews in general, for some reason, he had a bias. He was writing in German for the educated Jews, and he wrote of everything, of the Talmudic period, the Rishonim period. And for many, 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 many years, it was Gretz's history that you needed to quote in any scholarly work first, up until maybe 20, 30 years ago. You always go back to Gretz because he was the first Jewish historian who actually checked out sources, tried to analyze primary, secondary influences. Now, during this entire time, Rav Hirsch is alive. And Rav Hirsch receives volume by volume, and he's not very happy. So again, if you have nothing to do and you want to spend money and buy volume 5 of the collected writings of Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, when you open it up right in the beginning, part 1, and I'll show it to you without giving you a full, you can see it. What does it say? Then a quick, critical examination of Dr. H. Gretz's History of the Jews from the destruction of the Jewish state until the conclusion of the Talmud. And for the next 200 pages, in English translation from the German, Rav Hirsch argues with Gretz. And the main, how should I put this? If I need to condense, his basic argument against Gretz is that he had taken the Tanaim, the Amoraim, these rabbis, and dealt with them as if he was dealing with regular humans, like you and me. No, these were giants. And don't give Shammai and Hillel titles like one is lenient because he was a nicer fellow and one was not so lenient because he was tough, even though Talmudic statements seem to back that up. But no, that's not the way you speak about these rabbis, and this is not who they were, and you're not understanding it. And Rav Hirsch didn't let him get away with anything at all. And again, the Jews in Germany loved it. And at the Hildesheimer seminary, the books were read and the books were spoken of. Might they disagreed here and there with something? Of course, there's always something to disagree. But they looked at it and treated it with a certain amount of respect. Rav Hirsch had no qualms in just Xing it. This was not the book of Jewish history. This is not what it's about. Now, if you want to take the overall theme of Gretz in all his books and just condense it into the following, it is this. And a famous historian who passed away in the early 90s, Sala Wittemeyer Baron of Columbia, wrote his entire collection of 20-some volumes of the social history of the Jewish people as a response to Gretz, because he said, it is high time that the Jews do not write a lachrymose history, lachrymose from crying, from tears, because the Jewish people in their history, pogrom after pogrom, destruction after destruction, expulsion after expulsion. And that's what Gretz did. He kept on showing, we came here, we were beaten up, we went here, we were expelled. Yes, he spoke of what was done in between, but okay. And then again, and when you read Gretz's history that way, you say, oy vey, what a history, with suffering and suffering. And Baron and modern Jewish historians subsequently said, let's examine our history deeper. Again, using Ranke's methodologies, but look at the beauty of what was produced. Look at the works of philosophy and etc., the poetry, the commentaries to the Talmud, the commentaries to the Midrashim, to the Bible. These became really super important. And that is, now again, he gets translated, he gets condensed. He becomes a prominent historian in Germany. A number of universities actually invite him to come and be like a royal fellow. And Gretz lives out his life, quite interesting, resting basically on the laurels of this. There's one episode that I would like to point out to you in Gretz's life, which is absolutely fabulous. Very little is known about it. And I'd like to bring it to your attention because it shows us something very interesting. It shows us the courage that Gretz had in Germany to stand up to be a Jew and make an eloquent argument, because he engaged none other. Okay, let me just find it quickly. Okay, you should see it right now. This is the heading of an article, and you can find the article on academia if you want to see it there. So you can either search it with its title, or you can search it by the author's name. Michael Meyer, a great Jewish historian, who wrote the following article, kind of short, but very significant. Heinrich Gretz and Heinrich von Treitschke. Anybody, let me stop sharing it for a second. I need to see like a hand or two. Has anybody here heard of Treitschke? Okay, Henry, I see your hand is up because you're right in front of my screen here. Would you wave yes or no, meaning no or yes, or maybe the other way around? Treitschke was a famous anti-Semite. Yes. It was Treitschke who coined that phrase that said that Hitler used it, and it was part of the Storme, which said, "Der Juden sind unser Unglück." It's the Jews who are our bad luck. He was what should I call him? A anti-Semite spelled in capital letters. He hated many people, but the Jews for sure. And he was open about it and wrote about it and did not care. Jews are garbage. He actually once said in one of his writings, you know, we needed the Jews for a long time because they were geniuses at money. We had to depend on them. But now we too have become geniuses at money. The Jews are useless. We don't need them anymore. Hitler was clearly inspired by this fellow. But look at what Gretz did, which is just like astounding to me. And it's really something that people should know about. And let's read the beginning of the article. That's all we need. And if you want to get the rest of it again, and I mentioned this a few times, any scholarly articles that are out there, you know, if you get them from like the regular places, they'll charge you per article. Academia, literally under the scholar's name, Michael Meyer, has all his, I don't know, 200 articles or whatever. And you can just find the article there and download it or just read it. And look at what he says. In 1870, the Jewish historian Heinrich Gretz published volume 11 of his Geschichte der Juden, which brought his magnum opus down to the most recent period of Jewish history. Well over nearly 600 pages in this volume 11, over 12 volumes, were devoted to the Jews of Germany. Though at the time, they made up a little more than a tenth of the world's Jewish population. 9 years later, in the summer of 1879, the German historian, who bears the same first name, Heinrich von Treitschke, read Gretz's work in preparing volume 2 of his own multi-volume, The Deutsche Geschichte im Neuzeiten Jahrhundert, 100 years of German history. He was appalled and angered by what he found. Gretz's writing represented in the form of historical narrative just how those attributes which explained and almost justified the virulent anti-Semitism then appearing in Berlin. Only a few weeks after reading Gretz, Treitschke lent his own voice to the chorus of a protest against an allegedly ruinous Jewish influence in Germany and held Gretz up to the best example of Jewish adherence to anti-German and anti-Christian attitudes. This is a dispute that breaks out in Germany. But Gretz was not afraid to take this on and comment on it and argue and wrote about it. Okay, that the forces of anti-Semitism were already growing in Germany at this time is quite clear. Ranke himself was anti-Semitic too. And Ranke himself and some of his theories began to influence Bible criticism. So Germany, as much as the Jews were now finally beginning to feel proud of themselves, suddenly they began to feel threatened. It was not that perfect in Germany, which was kind of interesting because like, oh, if we join German society, things will be great. Well, you know what? They were not that great. There were still issues. And Gretz really put himself out there, which was quite interesting. So what do we do with Gretz? Here he is in Germany, comes in contact with Rav Hirsch, was very influenced by Rav Hirsch, but in the end, he veered to a path. And again, he was traditional, the last day of his life. But when it came to embracing Wissenschaft as Judentum, Gretz embraced it. He studied history. He wrote about it. Modern Orthodoxy of today, as many of you just have told me by shaking your hand, you own copies of Gretz in your own home. Rav Hirsch will come to your house, see the book on your shelf, and say to you very politely, as he was, why are you reading that book? There's something else you could read. I'm not so sure that's the book you should be reading. But the book took off, and the book gave the Jews a sense of history, as sad as it was, because you know what? It is sad. There's a lot of good to celebrate, but there's a lot in there. So let's put Gretz on the back burner, let it simmer, and let me go somewhere else and come to the other person that I want to discuss today, whose name was called out earlier. Let me get rid of this picture. Okay, Henry, you can now give me the name that you gave me before and tell me, who is this fellow?
David Tzvi Hoffman.
That's David Tzvi Hoffman. Okay, and Gretz, of course, did not look like that. Just to give you, again, the dates, Gretz died in 1891. But here is a student of Rav Hildesheimer, and we'll talk more about him in a minute. And we've mentioned his name already for the past 2 lectures. This is David Tzvi Hoffman, born in Verbo, which is Hungary, Czechoslovakia area. Gets an amazing Jewish education, studies with Rav Moshe Schick, the Chassam Sofer's #1 student. And then, luckily for him, now he was born in 1843. Rav Hildesheimer comes to become the rabbi in Eisenstadt, opens up his yeshiva there. David Tzvi Hoffman, who was a genius as a child, and a genius now, like from birth, as all these stories, but he really, at the age of 5, it is said of him by eyewitnesses, he could have a serious Gemara discussion with you, et cetera, et cetera. Brilliant person who read everything and studied everything. So he actually goes to Pressburg for a while and studies there too. He loves learning. He loves secular studies. And if you remember, he had come to Germany and gotten a job in Rav Hirsch's school. And it was Rav Hirsch who basically said, well, this thing on your head here, you have to remove. Because when you greet people in Germany, you don't wear a hat or a kippah. During Limudei Chol, we are bareheaded. During Limudei Kodesh, of course, you can put this on. So this is Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman, who is the author of a number of works of very important rabbinic influence. His most important rabbinic work is his responsa, the Melamed Lahoil, which contain about close to 400 responsa of literally the most cutting-edge questions happening at the time. And Sue, this one's for you, but do Jews need to serve in the army? You're a German citizen. Do you participate? You're a French citizen in the French army. And of course, rabbis argued about this, and some worried, how do you keep Shabbat, kashrut? What happens if you don't serve in the army? Would it be a chilul Hashem? And Rav Hirsch piped in on all these issues. If you remember, the question that we looked at for a second about the yarmulke was, can you attend court if you called into a German court without wearing a kippah? And automation had already started in this point. Can you use something that is run by a Shabbat clock, but not yet the one that we can speak about, but contraptions were made where people were able to turn on their stove on Shabbat. Can you use that on Shabbat? And Rav Hoffman deals with all of them with respectable sources, because he was, at the end of the day, this amazing giant. Rav Hirsch at the same time is a scholar of this Wissenschaft, das Judentum. And when Azriel Hildesheimer opens up his seminary, the first person hires, who does he hire? Rav Hoffman. And Rav Hoffman stays there. After running that seminary for 48 years, Rav Hildesheimer passes away. So in 1899, Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman becomes the head of the seminary. And he is, so to say, the chief rabbi of Berlin. He stays there. But something interesting happened in the interim, which is in 1871, before he came to Germany, Rav Hoffman, who had gone to the University of Vienna, University of Berlin, he received his doctorate from the University of Tübingen in Germany. To this day, it's one of the excellent, in Germany, you have like the 15 Universitäten Exzellente or something they're called, the excellent university. Tübingen is that research university to this day. He went to Tübingen and he got a doctorate in writing about Shmuel, not Shmuel Hanavi, but Mar Shmuel. Shmuel, like Rav and Shmuel in the Talmud, the Amora, the 3rd century Amora Shmuel. And that's what he got his dissertation in. And he actually publishes it. And some fellow reads it and is not sure what to do with it. And Rav Hirsch is still alive. And someone comes to Rabbi Hoffman and says, is this book an acceptable book to read? You're dealing with a Talmudic scholar, you, the Gadol Hador, as if he was a human being. You can clearly see the influence. And he says, well, I've sent it to many great rabbis, and he shows them all the great rabbis. Well, what do you think Rav Hirsch would say to this book? And Rav Hoffman says, but Kavod Gadol, send it to Rav Hirsch. And Rav Hirsch did not agree with it. Rav Hirsch gave David Tzvi Hoffman's book on Mar Shmuel pretty much the same treatment that he gave Gretz. In fact, according to some sources, he called it, he's almost a kofar. He's almost a heretic for writing such a book. Again, that was Rav Hirsch. And by the way, Rav Hoffman never responded, never said a word about it. We only discovered this later on after he had passed away in the correspondence and in the letters. And then we understand, this whole story of what Rav Hirsch had said and how that plays out. But more important than that is that Hoffman writes a book in Hebrew. It's available on Hebrew.org. Rayot Machriot Neged Wellhausen. Rayot Machriot, like proofs which are like undeniable against Wellhausen, who is the father of Bible criticism, which was amazing. Here is Rav Hoffman, who's the chief rabbi, the Gadol Hador, who has now written a book challenging Bible criticism. This man is living in two worlds, totally faithful to Torah. And then I must tell you something very, very interesting, which would be too long to go into the detail. And I can't tell you much about it because I discovered it only like 2 weeks ago, and I'm trying to figure this out. But let me see if I can find it. Anybody know what happens in 1912 in the city of Katowice or Katowice? 1912 is the founding of Agudat Israel, or of the Aguda. 1912 is when the Moetzet Gdolei HaTorah becomes Moetzet Gdolei HaTorah, the supreme body of rabbis who advise the Agudat Israel movement. Guess who's invited? Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman is one of the great Gedolim, this man who traversed the world of Wissenschaft, who embraced it, the Posek of Germany that everyone in Europe was writing to, and he was writing back to all of them, comes to Katowice. The first arguments, and I read this in 3 different papers, and it's like astounding. No one has written about this, so I'm giving you to our regular chas in the last couple of minutes. They struggle with what they call themselves to be Moatzet Gedolei Hador, Moatzet Chachamim, but big deal about that issue. Should it be Agudat Israel? Who are they? Are they called Nemanim La Torah? What should we call it? And one fellow from the city of Gros Verdun, as it's recorded in the newspapers at the time, his name was Gavel. Mr. Gavel suggested that they use the word Orthodox, the very word that Rav Hirsch was not too crazy about. And the Hungarian Jews responded, no, we can't, even though he was from Hungary, we can't use Orthodox because it gives the impression that we are like let's say, Neman La Torah. Anashim Nemanim La Torah should be part of this. They turn to Rav Hoffman, who the newspaper record says, let me see if I can find it quickly. If not, but you have to see it if I get it up there. Whoops, the wrong one. Oh, here it is. Let me get rid of this one. Here. Here's this fellow, one of the articles. There's 3 different Jewish newspapers that covered this meeting. They're all available on the Tel Aviv website, university website. They have all the Jewish newspapers from the 18 and 1900s. So this Gavel from Gros Verdun says, Likvoat Hamilah Orthodox, Bimkom Neman LaTorah. Dr. Hoffman, that's Rabbi Tzvi Hoffman, mi Berlin, midnaged ledivrei Gavel. He said, Lo hamvata Orthodox and gam lo neman la Torah. They're both not correct. Because, said Rav Hoffman, Lo ha'emunah hi ha'ikar b'yahadut elah ha'maseh. And whoever wrote this article, I'm thinking, I don't know why, put a question mark here. And then they went on, but let me translate it. What did Rav Hoffman say? The word Orthodox is not a good word. And the word Neman, or being trustworthy to the Torah, is also not good. Because it's not your belief that counts. It's what you do as a Jew that counts. And I think there's no better way to end this entire series, but to leave you with that thought. Does it matter what you believe is the faith that you hold dearly deep inside more important than the act of how you act as a human being and what you do? Now, again, I don't know the background, and in some of the other newspapers, it's more in detail between the Hungarian Rabbanim and everyone else, what word to use. And it's kind of interesting. Put any Jewish meeting together and Jews will argue. So here are these great people who've come to Katowice, and oy vey, as they said, it was doing. So I will research this more, and eventually I will share it with you. But coming to an end of the series, let's just leave it. Now that I'm going into overtime, with Hashem's help, when we start again, what I want to do, and I'm not letting go of this, we're coming to the history of Jews in America. So the lecture will start with the 20-some families that come to New Amsterdam in the mid-1600s. But all I want to do is use, and again, the word isn't there, the traditional, not proper word, Orthodox Jewish history of America. I want to concentrate on an area which has really not been touched upon a lot by historians, the Orthodox trajectory of the Jews in America. And did American modern Orthodoxy already begin in America long before it even started in Germany. So maybe our entire thesis up until now was wrong. So stay tuned. I just want to thank again Beth Jacob and Dr. Ann Winter, who's always there to make sure everything goes out on time and everyone gets the messages. So let me thank her again for all the work, and Beth Jacob, and of course, all those of you who have given of your time. Those of you on the East Coast who are still up, go to sleep. And wishing all of you, as they say in Yiddish, because no one speaks Yiddish anymore, Aziz in Pesach. This year should be a sweet Pesach. Last year is Geven Morer and a bitter in Pesach for all Yidden. So let us together rejoice in our real redemption and celebrate the beauty of the Jewish people by thanking Hashem, where we all started back in Egypt. And you know what? Thank God we're still here.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Lieberman, on behalf of the
Thank
school. I really
you.
appreciate it.
Rav.
Baruch
Wonderful.
Shalom.
Rabbi.
Thank you so